While the world races forward, consumed by screens, economies, elections, and conflict, a quieter story unfolds, hidden beneath the noise. In Jerusalem, something ancient is stirring. Garments, once worn only within the sacred courts of Solomon's temple, are being woven again. Golden vessels, once touched only by consecrated hands, have been remade. An altar stands, ready, consecrated, waiting. And now, a man has been named to a role thought lost to history. After 2 millennia, Israel has appointed a high priest. His name is not known to the world. There were no parades, no proclamations on national news. But for those with ears to hear, it is a sound like thunder in the distance. Could this be the signal the prophet spoke of? The beginning of the final week, the countdown hidden in Daniel's vision. Daniel 9:27 speaks of a covenant confirmed for 1 week, of sacrifices resumed and suddenly interrupted, of a desolation that comes like a shadow upon the temple. Now, for the first time in 2,000 years, the physical pieces of that prophecy are falling into place. But is this divine fulfillment, or a deception that leads to greater trembling? What role does the high priest truly play in the last days? And how does this tie to the one who tore the veil? Welcome to Echoes of Eden. Today, we walk between 2 realities: the earthly revival of ancient rituals and the eternal priesthood of Christ, who reigns from heaven's sanctuary. This is not just a history lesson. This may be the sound of prophecy returning to the stage. Long before kings ruled in Israel, before Jerusalem had walls, there was a man called Moses, trembling at the foot of a smoking mountain. There, in the fire of Sinai, God gave Israel more than laws. He gave them order, structure, and a sacred system that would point forward to heaven itself. At the heart of that divine structure stood a man, chosen, consecrated, covered in glory and blood, the high priest. It was not a political office. It was not earned by power or persuasion. It was a sacred calling, passed through the line of Aaron, Moses' brother, appointed by God himself, clothed in linen and gold, crowned with the words, "Holy to the Lord." He alone could enter the most holy place once a year, on Yom Kippur. There, behind the veil, in a room lit only by the presence of God, he would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on the mercy seat, atoning for the sins of the nation. This was no ordinary role. The high priest was Israel's living bridge between dust and divinity. His life, his garments, his every gesture carried prophetic weight. His breastplate bore 12 stones, each inscribed with the name of a tribe. He carried Israel on his heart into the very presence of God. But the role went far beyond ritual. He interpreted the law, oversaw worship, guarded the holiness of the temple. He was symbol and intercessor, standing in the gap between the holy and the fallen. To Israel, the priesthood was a sacred rhythm, a reminder that sin required blood, that access to God was possible, but never casual. And then came Solomon's temple. In the golden age of Israel, the high priest ministered amid splendor, bronze pillars, cherubim, incense rising like prayer. But as the centuries passed, sin returned to the sanctuary. Priests grew corrupt, sacrifices became mechanical, and prophets cried out, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." The temple was eventually destroyed, rebuilt, and defiled again. In the days of Jesus, the priesthood still functioned, but under Roman control. Caiaphas, the high priest during Christ's trial, symbolized a system that had lost its soul. Still, the idea, the longing, for a pure priesthood never died. Even after the temple's destruction in 70 AD, Jewish tradition held fast to the hope that one day the temple would rise again, that one day the high priest would return. But here lies the mystery. For Christians, the book of Hebrews declares that the true and eternal high priest has already come, not from the line of Aaron, but from the order of Melchizedek. Jesus Christ, sinless, eternal, incorruptible, offered not the blood of goats, but his own blood, not in an earthly temple made by hands, but in the heavenly one, where he sits at the right hand of God. And yet, here we are, 2,000 years later, and in Jerusalem, garments are being prepared, vessels sanctified, a priesthood reawakened. Why? What compels men to resurrect a role that, according to the New Testament, has already been fulfilled? Are we witnessing a revival of prophecy or a rehearsal for deception? This is the question that shadows the return of the high priest. Because the office is not just historical, it is eschatological. It is not just about tradition, it is about timing. And in Daniel's vision, the reappearance of sacrifices and a holy place defiled may very well depend on the presence of a high priest. The garments are ready, the altar stands, and a man has been chosen. Let the watchers take notice. For centuries, the temple was spoken of only in past tense, its glory remembered through liturgy, its ashes scattered by conquest. But in a quiet corner of Jerusalem, visionaries refused to let it remain a memory. In 1987, a group of Jewish scholars, artisans, and priests formed what would become the Temple Institute, a non-profit organization with one radical mission: to prepare everything necessary for the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. At first, it seemed like symbolic devotion, an act of remembrance. But it quickly became more than theory. Priests were identified by lineage, sons of Levi traced through generations. Garments were recreated, handwoven according to Exodus 28, in blue, scarlet, and gold. The sacred vessels were remade: pure gold menorahs, silver trumpets, bowls for blood sacrifice. And then came the altar, built in secret, measured in biblical cubits. It was eventually dedicated in a public ceremony, with priests in full regalia offering grain sacrifices under the sky, just outside the Temple Mount. These are not rumors, they are documented facts. The Temple Institute's museum in Jerusalem openly displays these items. They are not hidden, they're showcased, not as religious memorabilia, but as functional tools awaiting activation. To date, the Institute has crafted over 70 of the sacred items commanded in Torah, from the table of showbread to the golden crown inscribed Kodesh La'Yuch, holy to the Lord. These are not replicas, they are ready. But the vessels alone are not enough. There must be men who know how to use them. So the training began. In the Judean hills, priests, Kohanim, have been learning the ancient rites, slaughter techniques, blood rituals, incense procedures. Their hands are being prepared for tasks not performed since 70 AD. One priest, when interviewed, said, "We are not waiting. We are preparing as if the temple could be rebuilt tomorrow." This changes the conversation. For decades, theologians debated when a third temple might be built. But now, the real question is, how much more needs to happen? Because nearly everything is in place. The garments, complete; the vessels, constructed; the priests, trained; the altar, consecrated. All that remains is the location. And this is where the tension rises. The Temple Mount, biblical Mount Moriah, is under Islamic control. The Dome of the Rock stands where the Holy of Holies once stood. Any attempt to lay a foundation stone could trigger a global crisis. But in prophecy, something always shifts the ground. Could it be conflict, a political treaty, a deceptive peace? Whatever the catalyst, Scripture Scripture suggests that worship in a rebuilt temple will resume. Daniel 9, Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 11. Each reference implies a functioning temple at the end of the age, with sacrifices, with a holy place, with an abomination that causes desolation. And here's the stunning truth. You don't need a fully built temple to resume sacrifice. According to Jewish law, sacrifices can begin once the altar is consecrated and priests are properly trained, even if the temple structure is not yet rebuilt. And that has already happened. So when we speak of temple preparations, we're not speaking metaphorically. This is not mystical, not hypothetical. It is unfolding, step by step, in our time. And every step echoes louder into prophecy. Because the moment sacrifices resume, the clock of Daniel begins again. The countdown enters motion, and the next chapter in God's story starts to turn. If the garments are ready, if the vessels have been crafted, if the altar stands consecrated, then one question remains. Who will stand before it? A priest cannot anoint himself. The role of high priest, the Kohen Gadol, must be appointed with reverence. It must be recognized by authority, and it must carry the weight of Scripture. In 2016, without headlines or global fanfare, that appointment quietly happened. His name is Baruch Kahane, a scholar, a rabbi, a Levite by lineage. He was chosen by a re-established body in Israel known as the nascent Sanhedrin, a modern revival of the ancient council that once governed religious law in Jerusalem. The announcement was not made through mainstream channels. It was released through niche religious outlets, and even then, phrased cautiously, an acting high priest has been selected in case of the resumption of temple service. But to those who understand prophecy, this was not theoretical. This was ignition. Baruch Kahane accepted the role on one condition, that he would be prepared to serve at a moment's notice, should the temple be rebuilt or sacrifices resume. In other words, Israel once again has a high priest. For many, this is shocking, not because it's impossible, but because it signals the return of something long dormant. The last official high priest served before 70 AD, just prior to the Roman siege that reduced the temple to rubble. Since then, the office has existed only in memory, prayer, and ancient texts, until now. The Sanhedrin's decision was based on years of preparation. They had already selected priests for training. They had observed the Temple Institute's readiness, and in their eyes, the prophetic prerequisites were aligning. But let's be clear, this was not a political appointment. It was not sanctioned by the Israeli government. There were no legal powers granted, no budget, no temple keys handed over. It was symbolic, but profoundly strategic. Because in the architecture of biblical prophecy, the presence of a high priest is not just traditional, it's functional. Daniel 9:27 refers to sacrifice and offering being cut off in the middle of a prophetic week. That implies one thing: they must begin again, and they cannot begin without a priest. More specifically, a high priest to oversee the rituals and ensure they align with Torah law. Baruch Kahane's appointment provides that missing piece. Some dismiss this as fringe activity. But let's pause and ask, if a high priest has been named, what does that make possible? Sacrifices, ritual cleansing, temple protocol. And suddenly, verses that once felt distant begin to feel near. 2 Thessalonians 2 speaks of a man of sin entering the temple, exalting himself above all that is called God. Revelation 11 speaks of a temple measured, its altar counted. But before those events unfold, there must be a structure, an altar, a priesthood. Each element now exists, but there is another layer. Some within Israel disagree with the Sanhedrin's efforts. They warn that stirring up temple expectations could provoke violence. Others argue that only the Messiah can appoint a true high priest. Still others, including Orthodox Jews, await divine confirmation, not a man-made institution. And yet, even cautious observers cannot deny that something is happening. The wheels are turning. What does this mean for followers of Jesus? It means discernment is more important than ever, because the return of the high priest in Jerusalem is not just a cultural story. It is a prophetic signpost. It forces us to ask, are we witnessing the preparation for God's fulfillment, nor the setup for the great deception that precedes Christ's return? Either way, we cannot ignore this moment. Israel now has a man dressed in priestly garments. He knows the law of Moses. He has been trained in temple service. He stands ready to fulfill a role last occupied 2,000 years ago. And whether he leads a genuine revival or becomes part of a larger prophetic drama, his presence means the stage is set. Among the scrolls of prophecy, no passage has sparked more debate or more awe than Daniel 9:27. It is one verse, yet it stretches from ancient Babylon to the final moments of history. And today, as sacrifices prepare to return, this verse demands our full attention. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. In the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. Daniel 9:27. To understand this, we must begin with the structure of Daniel's vision. He speaks of 70 weeks, symbolic units of 7 years. The final week, the 70th, is where the timeline accelerates into the apocalyptic. The he in this verse, who is he? Interpretations vary. Some believe it points to the Antichrist, a future political figure who enters into a deceptive peace treaty with Israel. Others suggest it refers to a revived Roman system, or even a spiritual counterfeit. But nearly all interpretations agree on this. This figure will confirm a covenant, and then violently break it. Halfway through the 7-year period, 3.5 years in, the sacrifices stop, the offerings cease, and something unholy enters the holy place. The abomination that causes desolation. This phrase echoes through Scripture. Jesus himself references it in Matthew 24:15. When you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Paul refers to it in 2 Thessalonians 2:4. He will exalt himself above all that is called God and sit in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God. John describes it in Revelation 13, an image of power, deception, worship enforced. But all of it connects back to Daniel's timeline. Let's zoom in. What must exist before this prophecy can unfold? A temple, a functioning altar, a system of sacrifice and offering, and a figure with authority to suspend it. These are not spiritual metaphors. Daniel uses priestly language, sacrifices, offerings, abominations. He is describing something physical, literal, and terrifyingly specific. And here's the key. If Israel has a consecrated altar, if there are priests ready to serve, if there is already a man appointed as high priest, then for the first time in 2,000 years, the infrastructure of Daniel 9:27 is not just imaginable, it is imminent. But this raises deeper questions. Why would Israel begin sacrifices again? Especially in a world where most modern Jews don't even believe the temple will be rebuilt. 2 possible answers arise. 1, a crisis, a war. A collapse, something that shatters secularism and pushes the nation back toward ancient identity. Or 2. A covenant, a peace agreement, possibly global in scope, that grants Israel permission to restore its temple practices. Could this be the covenant with many? A treaty involving multiple nations, perhaps brokered by a charismatic leader? A leader who seems like a Messiah, but is not. Once the covenant is signed, Daniel says, the clock starts. And halfway through, everything changes. The mask is removed, the sacrifices are stopped, and an abomination defiles the temple, just as Antiochus IV did before the Maccabean revolt. Except this time, it will be global, and the consequences eternal. This is why Daniel 9:27 is not just theological, it is foundational. It offers a countdown, a roadmap, a prophetic calendar, set not by human hands, but by heaven. And in that calendar, the resumption of sacrifice is not the end, it's the beginning. Watch carefully, because the hands of the clock are moving. The middle of the week draws near, and prophecy is on the verge of becoming reality. While preparations unfold on earth, and garments are stitched in Jerusalem, there is a greater priesthood, unshaken by time, untouched by corruption. Long before Baruch Kahane was appointed, before the Temple Institute laid a single brick, Hidu, a high priest, had already been enthroned. His name is Jesus, not born into the Levitical line, but declared by the Father. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 5:6. This order is older than Levi, more mysterious than Aaron, and more eternal than any earthly temple. The book of Hebrews is clear. Christ did not enter a man-made sanctuary, but the true tabernacle, the one in heaven. He entered once for all into the holy places, by his own blood, thus securing eternal redemption. Hebrews 9:12. He did not offer a goat or a lamb. He offered himself. The veil that once separated man from God was torn, not by man's hand, but by divine judgment. When Jesus cried out on the cross, "It is finished," he wasn't ending his life. He was completing a covenant. He became the final sacrifice, the ultimate atonement, the one who fulfilled every shadow in the law. So now, no earthly high priest can replace him. No altar of stone can equal the cross. No blood of bulls can cleanse like his. For believers, the return of a Levitical priesthood does not negate the gospel. It confirms it. It shows the world is searching again, yearning for cleansing, desperate for redemption. But the answer is not in a golden menorah or a rebuilt altar. It is in the pierced hands of the risen Son. Still, prophecy must unfold. The temple may rise, the sacrifices may resume, and a man may stand in priestly robes once again. But for those who know the Lamb, there is no need to return to the shadows. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. Hebrews 8:1. And he intercedes for us, not once a year, but always. This is our foundation, not fear, not ritual, but Christ, who lives and reigns and will return. Let the temple rise, let prophecy unfold, let the world watch, but let the church remember. The veil has been torn, the sacrifice has been made, and our high priest sits forever on the throne. If you've made it to the end of this journey, thank you. You are part of a remnant that still watches, that still discerns the signs. And now, more than ever, your voice, your heart, and your light matter. Before we part, hear this word from the Lord. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forevermore. Psalm 125, 1-2, ESV. So do not fear what rises. Do not waver when the earth trembles. God surrounds his people. And above all, guard your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Proverbs 4:23, ESV. Because the real battlefield in the last days begins within. If this message stirred your spirit, please like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Eden, and share it with at least 2 people who need to hear it. Leave us a comment. My eyes are open. My heart is guarded. It helps the message spread, and it lets us know you're watching with us. And don't miss our next video, where we'll uncover a prophetic mystery hidden, and what it reveals about the gates of Jerusalem in the last days.